If there's one thing that BSG loves doing, it's completely destroying my sanity, not only through playing the game, but also through trying to benchmark it. As you guys probably know, this wipe has gone off to a rocky start. Patch 16 didn't really go as planned, there was some hiccups, there's a bunch of server issues, and most importantly, the subject of this video, there's a lot of performance issues. I have some adjustments to my setting recommendations based on last wipe, and I have some things that I still need to dig into, but we'll talk about that. If you didn't know, my settings guides are not simply recommending you a certain setting to run. I'm going to try to explain to you what each setting does so you have a better understanding of what you should be changing based on what I describe and according to your own specific hardware. If you're not sure about your hardware, if your GPU or CPU bottlenecked, I have guides that I will link down below if you need some help. Or if you'd like some more personalized help, there is my Discord, which is the first link in the description below. We have a bunch of amazing people in there and also a help forum on there so you can make your own channel and get specific help from people in the community regarding your specific issue, sometimes even myself. If you'd rather ask me questions directly though, there is my live stream, which I do at Friday at 6:30 p.m. CST and Sunday at 1:30 p.m. CST. Don't hesitate to hop in there and ask me any questions you have live. But yeah, make sure to hit the usual buttons down below if this video helps you, and let's just get right into it. We're now in a offline customs raid here and part of the new customs expansion, which actually is really pretty, by the way, but there's some bigger issues that we won't necessarily have to point out. And throughout this video, what I'm going to be doing is I will compare some of the settings live for you, but I also have a bunch of pre-prepared screenshots that I have from the previous patch and from this current patch as well, just to showcase what some of the settings do. And I'll be using these in combination with iCat to compare them side by side. Before we do that though, I do have a couple settings that we need to cover first. We have automatic RAM cleaner and we have only use physical core. So the automatic RAM cleaner does what the name implies. It cleans out any unneeded memory that Tarkov is currently using, or I should say allocating itself. However, it's not fully automatic, as there are some things that you still need to do manually. To trigger this while you're in raid, it won't happen automatically. You need to do it by hitting escape. Since I'm already in the menu though, once I check this and hit save, it will trigger. So if you take a look at my memory allocation and the amount that the game is currently allocating, you can see that when I hit automatic RAM cleaner, those numbers will drop drastically and the allocation will drop over time. If I wanted to trigger this again at any point, I would simply hit escape again, and there will be a stutter when you do this, so some people don't like that, and they'd much rather just turn it on when needed. So if you feel like you'd like to use it at some point, I'd recommend just checking it, hitting save, letting it clean, and then unchecking it. So once that cleaning starts, you can just go uncheck it and then you'd be good to go. Just as a quick side note, using automatic RAM cleaner all the time did show a reduction in RAM usage by about 1 to 2 gigabytes when I last tested it about a year or so back. I haven't tested it recently since I haven't done my memory leak quote unquote testing in a while, but when I go and do that again this wipe, I will make sure to include that and see if that's still the case. But if you are really struggling with RAM usage in this wipe, that may be something to note too, and that might factor into why you may want to run it on all the time. Next, we have only use physical cores. You've probably heard that this disables hyperthreading for the game, but you weren't entirely sure what that meant. Long story short, to just keep it very simple, you can see up here in my graph that I've made using CapFrameX and RevoTuner Statistics Server, we have CPU 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. These are the 8 cores on my 7800X 3D. Each one of the cores has 2 percentages next to it, meaning that they have 2 threads, they're hyper-threaded cores. The game is currently bouncing work back and forth between these threads. You could think of it sort of like 2 mouths that are feeding one core so that it's always doing some sort of work. When you turn on only use physical cores, it will only use one of those threads per core. So you'll see when I do this and hit save, the usage drastically drops for most of these threads right here, whereas the main threads on each physical core get more use. I haven't seen any performance impact with running this setting, and for most people I've recommended process lasso and affinity tuning more than anything else. I have videos on that I will link down below if you're interested. Mainly I'd recommend it for those of you who are on, say, higher end Ryzen chips that have dual CCDs and a bunch of cores, or if you're on higher end Intel chips. It can also help if you have a lot of bloatware in the background, so if you think that may be you, make sure to check out that video. Next though, let's actually get into the meat of it, the graphics portion. This is where there's some things we gotta talk about. Oh, yeah. Let's start simple though. Screen resolution. You know it, you love it. Should be set to your native resolution. You don't need to have this any lower. If you're trying to get more performance, I would not recommend setting this lower. If anything, if you're GPU bottlenecked and need the extra performance, use one of the upscalers down here, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Aspect ratio, it is what it is, though if you play at 4:3, I gotta assume that you like having motion sickness or something like that. Screen mode is also your personal preference. Full screen is ideal technically, though borderless allows you to tab in and out easier. So if you do tend to be tabbing in and out a lot, especially if you're looking up guides a lot, then I'd probably recommend sticking to borderless, as that'll make your life a lot easier. Monitor is self-explanatory. Make sure to set this to the monitor you're playing on. And now let's get to the real star of the show today, texture quality. Now, obviously, you'd assume texture quality controls the quality of textures you see all over the game. Wherever you're looking, all of this is controlled. All the quality of everything you see here, including your hands, your gun, everything is controlled by texture quality. I have some comparison screenshots that I'll just pull up for you really quick in iCat, and as you can see, it's labeled low, medium, and high for each one of the respective settings. So whenever I pull up iCat, just look down here and I'll have every picture labeled and named so you can have a better idea of what's going on. You can clearly see though from my screenshots from last wipe that there are some clear differences in the clearness of these textures when comparing low versus medium versus high. I mean, with this logo alone, you sort of get an idea of what I'm talking about. Though it doesn't just stretch to this, like I said, it stretches to your player model, the gun, the hands, basically everything. And in my opinion, low does look extremely mushy and it's kind of hard to play with in my opinion, though. I mean, you'd get used to it. My recommendations from previous wipes though have kind of changed. After playing on the new customs, I was having some major issues with VRAM utilization and RAM utilization. With high texture quality on my 4070 Ti Super that has 16 gigs of VRAM and my 32 gigabytes of RAM, I was experiencing some VRAM stutter. It was pretty bad when I was playing one time, and that was mainly because I didn't restart my game in a while and there was some buildup of memory, which, yes, I believe that's a problem, but let me make a separate video on that because that's a whole nother topic. Anyway, it was sort of a concern, and though I absolutely adore how high textures look, I don't know if I can continue playing without making sure that I continuously restart. Previously, I said that you might be able to try high textures if you have 12 gigabytes or more of VRAM, but I'm going to have to up that. I honestly think that unless you have at a bare minimum 16 gigabytes of VRAM, high texture quality is not ideal. It can definitely cause issues, especially if you're not restarting your game after every couple of raids, and that's something that I noticed and I will continue to test and make a follow-up video on. My recommendation though for these different texture qualities is that low should be for, especially for people 6 gigabytes and under, but with how this patch is currently going, I don't know if I can recommend 8 gigabyte GPUs use medium. There seems to be some issues. If you have especially an 8 gigabyte VRAM card that is paired with 16 gigabytes of RAM, you should use low textures. If you're between 8 and 16 gigabytes of VRAM, you can try medium. If you're at say 10 or 12 gigabytes, medium should be okay for you. But again, if you're at 8, you could try medium and see what works. It also heavily depends on what resolution you're playing at, so that can also have a factor, but medium can work for GPUs between 8 and 16 gigabytes. And if you're 16 gigabytes and above, you can try high, but if you experience stutters, constant micro stutters that seem almost rhythmic and not just like sporadic, they're quite constant little stutters, that could be from VRAM and you should lower your texture quality. Also, if you plan on running high or medium textures, with this wipe and how it's going, I would recommend running Streets of Tarkov lower texture resolution mode. If you're running at high texture quality, Streets of Tarkov lower texture resolution mode, this setting will run it at medium on Streets only, so every other map will stay high textures and Streets will be at medium. And if you have your texture quality set to medium, it will then set the texture quality of Streets of Tarkov to low when you have it enabled. As far as I could tell from testing in the past, this setting had no effect when you had your texture quality set to low. There was no visible effect to VRAM or RAM utilization whatsoever. But yeah, if you're experiencing stutters that are quite rhythmic in nature, this might be the source of it, and I would highly recommend turning down your textures first. I don't know if BSG is going to address this, but this is one of the primary concerns that I've had with this wipe so far, so be on the lookout for this. Next up though is shadows quality. This is fairly similar to how I was talking about it last wipe. It controls the quality of shadows. It controls their resolution, but it also controls the distance of those shadows. So if I could put these in here, these are from last wipe, so they obviously there's no snow here, but it gets the point across about the shadow quality. You can see here that there is definitely a difference in quality between these 4 options. However, this does change with distance. So for example, medium will have higher quality shadows at a further distance than what low has, and then same with high and medium and so forth. Adding on to that though, it does control the raw resolution of those shadows as well. If the resolution of shadows and the blurriness concerns you, and you have the extra GPU headroom to spare, meaning that your CPU bottlenecked most of the time and your GPU usage is not 100%, then you might be able to run these higher. For this wipe, I've been considering turning up my shadows, but I haven't committed yet. But we'll see how it goes over the course of the wipe. I'll be doing some more testing and running different settings to see how it goes. But yeah, if you have GPU headroom, feel free to test and use whatever you prefer. But if you are GPU bottlenecked, meaning your GPU usage is at 100%, I would make sure to stay at the lowest shadow quality that you can handle. Here's another kicker: object LOD quality. In the past, I had a pretty clear opinion on this. It was one of the few settings that affected CPU bound performance, so I basically said set it to the lowest that you prefer, but don't go to 2 because 2 looks pretty bad and there's a lot of pop-in. If you didn't know, LOD is level of detail, so this setting controls how far away objects switch to their lower detail counterparts. So I can see if I can see anything here live. If you hear people complaining about pop-in, this is what they're talking about from object LOD quality. So yeah, you can, wait, what's that? At this point, I don't even know what that's called. Is that LOD? What the hell is going on there? All right, anyway, ignoring that, let's see if we can find a different thing. So you can see here that as I walk towards this bus stop right here, it's going to load in a higher quality model as I get closer. And there's also something that just popped in there, I'm pretty sure, and I'll zoom in on that. As far as the comparisons go, there was something that I noticed with this wipe that made it kind of concerning. So let me just pull this up really quick. So these are screenshots from the last wipe, and it's pretty clear to see the difference between the lowest level of detail quality and the highest level of detail quality. There's clearly a difference in the amount of trees on this ridgeline here, and you can clearly see that some of them are like lower 2D models here. There's also some things that are definitely lower LOD quality that are like 2D sprites that change to 3D when you up the LOD. You can see because this is like checkered, I think there's something funky going down there, but that was still the case then. And I went to try and confirm that object LOD quality was still doing the same thing that it was last wipe. I noticed when I was playing on stream before I started filming this video that object LOD quality seemed to be controlling FPS way more than I saw in previous wipes. I mean on customs at least. Depending on where I was, there was huge swings in performance depending on what I set it to. I'm talking like 20 to 30% performance when CPU bottlenecked. It was a lot. And so I went into a offline raid and tried to look at the LOD quality again. So let me just put these in here real quick. The one thing though that really sucks is that BSG removed the pile of logs that I was standing on for these screenshots. Lord knows why. It's like they were specifically trying to screw me over. But anyway, I was trying to look at this tree ridge line to see if things were still different in between the 2 screenshots. I brought other people in to try and confirm this, but it looks like the trees are mostly the same. Like I can't really see much of a difference here. There are definitely objects that are made transparent, as you can see like on this truck here. A lot of these have made they're basically transparent at this point. They've not loaded in. There's a box over here too that does the same thing as last wipe, so that's still happening. But as far as the trees, these aren't really popping out anymore, which I guess can be a positive and a negative thing. But as far as this is concerned, maybe this is partially to blame for the reduction in performance, even at lower LOD qualities. At least in customs, I know that LOD quality is definitely controlling the level of detail of some of the big new factory sections in the map, and when you're in certain parts of the map and turn the setting lower, you might see drastic improvements to performance because it's lowering the LOD quality of those big regions on the map. That made this basically impossible to benchmark, as it literally depended on where I was in the map, so I knew that I couldn't actually get solid numbers from there on out. There's also the whole thing with invisible players, where in the past there was an issue when setting LOD quality too low to where players and PMCs that were like 300 meters out plus would just straight up not be there if you were not looking through a scope. So with those issues combined, I don't know if the invisible player bug is still a thing, by the way, to be very clear, but with how this affects performance, I don't know if I can recommend setting LOD quality high at all. I mean, it would make your performance way worse when you were further away from some of those bigger sections in the map. However, if you have your object LOD set lower, that means that you're going to see more performance fluctuation, because as you go to these like more detailed sections of the map, like over there in those buildings, you're going to see your FPS tank even harder, because on other sections, when you're further away from these locations, especially when you're not looking at them, your performance is going to be extremely improved. So you're going to see massive fluctuations, and that's without even talking about the AI. So what does that mean for you? Well, basically, long story short, if you're trying to get the best performance for most of the time, setting object LOD quality to the lowest you can handle is best, still, technically. However, it's still not ideal, as your performance will look like it's fluctuating a lot more. Not to mention, the game's going to look a lot worse, and as you saw in these comparison screenshots, there's going to be some things that just look kind of checkerboardy or invisible. It's up to you for whatever your preference is, but it's very hard to say with how it is right now. I don't know what their plans are in the future, and so it's very hard for me to give a recommendation, but even still, after talking to some people from my community about it, I still just wanted to mention this, because it's virtually impossible to benchmark, but at least the context there will give you an idea of what you should set for yourself personally. Also, for those of you who would like to see it, I will just add in all of the additional screenshots real quick. So this is 2.5, 3, and 3.5 here. So we just add all of these in order, so you'll be able to get a comparison shot for yourself. And feel free to pause the video at any point if you'd like to see what these look like in comparison. I'll just scroll through really quick so you can get an idea. Okay, next is overall visibility. This is basically the same as last wipe in here. You can set this to whatever you prefer. It just controls how things render on objects that are way outside the map, like landmark level objects. There are some things that are still controlled by it within the map as well, but for the most part, you're not going to see much popping. You're also not going to see much performance difference either, from what I could see this wipe. A place that you can see this a lot is when you're looking down Primorsky Avenue. The apartment near Cardinal, when you're looking at it toward or from Lexos, can sometimes despawn. Besides that, and some places on woods like you can see here, I'll pull that up real quick. This still gets the point across from last wipe. As you can see here, overall visibility at 400. These buildings over here simply weren't there. And then as you up it, you can see at 1,000, these are clearly there. Oh no, now I'm getting cold. Are you kidding me? Okay, I temporarily went inside Fortress just to try and avoid getting frostbite again. Next up is the cloud quality. I still haven't been able to find any performance impact with it whatsoever, and my screenshots from last wipe still showcase it off very well. You can see here for the different shadow qualities, Jesus. For the different clouds qualities, you can see here, it just simply controls the gradients in between the different colors of clouds. So you can see here at low clouds, these just kind of are like, what's the word? They're not blending well together, but as you up the cloud quality, there's more layers to it, and it gets more granular as the color starts to fade in and out. At these lower cloud qualities, it's very blotchy, but as you up the cloud quality, it gets a lot more smooth and nice. I don't see any reason not to run this at high right now. There seems to be no performance impact whatsoever. Anti-aliasing is next, and this is something I really wished they improved for this wipe, but sadly it's not the case. You can see here that anti-aliasing set to off. You have a lot of what we call jagged edges all over the screen. So you can see a bunch of the edges are shimmering all over the place in the image, and even though it's sharp, it can be very distracting for people. This offers the best performance when GPU bottlenecked, but it's not that much of a performance impact to at least try to run something like FXAA or fast approximate anti-aliasing. This will at least clean up a bit of that shimmering, but you're still left with an image that's unstable. If this still doesn't satisfy you, you'd have to take at least a little bit more performance hit when GPU bottlenecked to go up to something like TAA or TAA high. The only complaint that people have with TAA is that it is incredibly blurry to some. So if you believe that the image gets too blurry when using TAA, you're kind of out of luck. These are the only options in the game right now, and I'd really look forward to them adding additional anti-aliasing solutions in the future, as they are desperately needed. The current anti-aliasing options either make the game too blurry or it is way too shimmery. So in the future, I hope they address this, but if you'd like to get rid of as much of shimmering as possible, run TAA, or if you're not GPU bottleneck, TAA high. Otherwise, if you don't care about the shimmering, you could run off if you want the best clarity possible, but in my opinion, it looks very bad. Some like using upscalers as an attempt to have some sort of better anti-aliasing. The current upscalers we have in the game are DLSS, FSR 2.2, and FSR 3.0. Really the only ones you should be concerned with are 3.0 and DLSS, as those offer the best image quality overall. DLSS is only available on RTX cards, as it requires the hardware in 20, 30, and 40 series GPUs in order to actually work. The higher base resolution you are, the more acceptable you might find it using this instead of an anti-aliasing solution. However, keep in mind that these run at a lower than native rendering resolution. They are not native. Quality, for example, is at 66% of your native resolution, and I'll have all the percentages listed on the screen right now. The lower resolution your base monitor is will also decrease the quality of this upscaling, so be very cautious on if you attempt to run this, as it may drastically decrease your image quality, especially at 1080p. But on the flip side, if you're GPU bottlenecked, this can also drastically improve your performance and also not be as much of an image integrity hit as, say, lowering your base resolution. Just as an FYI, I have a quick video showcasing 1440p native, DLSS unbalanced, and FSR 3 unbalanced, so that you guys can see some of the weaknesses of each one of the upscalers while deciding which one you'd want to use if you have an option for both. Otherwise, at least this shows you a decent comparison between the best anti-aliasing native has to offer versus a couple of the upscalers, and you can make a decision for yourself. If it improves your performance, then there you go too. But anyway, back to me. Old me. Some people like FSR 3.0 for how sharp they think it is, but your mileage may vary. My personal preference out of them all is DLSS for sure, for how this looks, but again, your mileage may vary. I just realized I forgot to cover resampling. It's useless. Don't use it. The only time it'll help you is if you're GPU bottlenecked, and if you're GPU bottlenecked, just use DLSS or FSR, or if you're trying to get better image quality, use something like DLDSR perhaps, as then you can have more granularity with how you choose what resolution you're actually going to run at. Don't bother with this, as it's really difficult to run when you're trying to run, say, 2 times, and horrible image quality when you're trying to go below like 0.75. Anyway, let's get to HBAO. There's a lot of different options for quality here, and so I got some comparison screenshots that I'll pull up for you guys real quick. Now, I know there is a lot of screenshot here, but as you can clearly see, one of the first things you can tell in the screenshots is actually the quality of shadowing on the PMC's hand. So you can see that when the second you switch off of HBAO to something like max performance, there's a little bit of detail shadowing around the gun, because ambient occlusion adds that bit of detail. As far as we know right now, this only hurts GPU bound performance, so you should be able to run this if you are not GPU bound with no sort of performance impact, as long as it doesn't push you up to that point. You can see that, for example, around the trash bags. In this part, adding any sort of detail shadowing happens at max performance and above, and those shadows tend to get a little bit darker as you increase to colored ultra, where those shadows actually start to have some color based on the things around them in the scene. For me though, personally, I think that high and everything above it is a bit too dark of a shadow and kind of looks a bit off to me. So I like just having max performance just for that little bit of detail, while also not hurting that much performance if and when I'm ever GPU bottlenecked. I don't like how off looks though, because it looks too bright and unnatural for my taste. Though, if you wanted the brightest possible image, that is something that you should have completely off. You can see even in RAID right here, when I have HBAO set to max performance, let's see if I can find something that I could use with shadowing on the ground here. Even where this meets the wall right here, and this box right here, and all of this, there would be no detail shadowing at all around any of these objects if I turned HBAO to off. So you can see right here that that's high performance. If I set it to off right here, you can see there's no shadowing whatsoever around any of this, and everything just kind of sits there. And like even where the crease of the wall meets the floor is just sort of like sitting there. It looks a bit 2D and weird. So in my opinion, I really like having max performance just to make things stand out in the scene a little bit more. Next up is SSR, or screen space reflections. It controls all of these sort of little reflections that you see on the ground. There's a really good place to do that inside of here if you want to test it for yourself. These server racks, or whatever these are right here, reflect the light from this window very well. But obviously, since there's screen space, when the window is gone from the camera, those reflections disappear. I have mine currently set to ultra because I like how they look, and anything that's lower than, say, high, the reflections tend to be very low quality. However, this does hurt your performance when GPU bound, so again, if you're GPU bottlenecked, I would recommend avoiding SSR entirely when possible. You can see here from my screenshots from last wipe that the low reflections do look very, very low quality, and really medium is where it starts to get somewhat acceptable. I think low just looks way too bad. But I would recommend actually playing with this setting and seeing what you like the most, because if you have the GPU headroom, I do actually really like having these reflections. It can make the game look a lot nicer. Just as a quick FYI as well, there was a rumor about having SSR on slightly increasing the visibility in certain scenes, and at least in this factory hallway, that is still the case. There is still a slight increase to the visibility in the hallway when I have SSR set to off, at least with the floor. The floor is a little bit brighter than when I have it set to completely off. If you want the best visibility, then technically, and best performance, it would technically be low, but if you are not GPU bottlenecked, meaning your GPU usage is not at 100%, then you might be able to push it higher without any degradation to your performance. Next up is anisotropic filtering. This is very self-explanatory. Well, no, it's not. What am I talking about? It's not self-explanatory, but it is fairly easy to understand. My original explanation in my original recording was a little bit long-winded, so I'm going to try to keep it nice and short and pristine here for anisotropic filtering. What anisotropic filtering does is it controls how textures look when they're not facing directly at you. So you can see right here for this, you can see this texture gets really blurry as it starts to get to a more sharper and sharper angle away from the camera, from where it's facing, because it's facing directly up, yet I'm facing this way, and it's not really resolving itself well for the camera. The ground looks very blurry right now. If I set my anisotropic filtering up to, say, per texture, that clears up quite significantly, and it gets a lot less blurry on that texture, and it looks more like how it should be. That's what anisotropic filtering does. It can have a slight impact on your performance when you're GPU bound, but if you're just CPU bound, or bottlenecked, interchangeable term basically, if you are bottlenecked by your CPU, you can have enough room to probably set anisotropic filtering to on. This is probably the clearest of the three settings in my opinion, and though it's kind of hard to distinguish from per texture in this specific scene, it does actually handle some more texture quality concerns that I see on some maps, like for example on streets on the road. For some reason per texture just doesn't quite get the road right and doesn't get enough samples to make the rail track on the road actually be clear. So with forced on, I get to see that that is indeed clear, and it will apply that high level of sampling detail to every single texture. Again, it hurts your GPU bound performance by a little bit, but if you aren't GPU bottlenecked, you have plenty of room to run that and get the best image quality possible. Next is Nvidia Reflex. If you didn't know, obviously it's low latency technology. If you can use it on your Nvidia card, then I would typically recommend doing it. What it does is it syncs up the work that your CPU and GPU are doing so that when the CPU is done working on a frame, then it passes the work to the GPU, and then the GPU instantly starts working on that next frame. The on plus boost setting basically tightens up those timings in between the CPU and GPU, and also makes sure that your GPU clocks are kept as high as they can be for situations like, for example, now, if my GPU usage was at 45% while I was in RAID, it would try to make sure that those clocks stayed higher so that you wouldn't have to worry about degradations in performance if all of a sudden your GPU usage increased and you needed those higher clocks to achieve a better frame rate. Literally the morning that I was recording this though, Hayes did see a bug with this setting that has popped up in the past in Arena, where he had massive degradations in performance when running this on. The second he switched it off while he was in RAID, or not in RAID, but in a match in Arena, it drastically improved his performance. However, do keep in mind that you would have to do the VSync trick, which where you check VSync in here and uncheck it in the NVIDIA control panel. I believe I'll have to check that because I don't use it, but it does cap your FPS to 144 if you do not use that VSync trick. Granted, I'm sure that most of you probably aren't hitting above 144 FPS most of the time. I can be pretty safe about that, but yeah, that's just another thing to consider as well. It's a very good technology when it works, but they've wipe after wipe have had this bug, and I don't know if it's actually in Tarkov or if it's just in Tarkov Arena, but if you notice that your performance is drastically lower on locations that you know were a higher performance, excluding customs. So for example, if you're on, say, Lighthouse and your performance is way worse than you thought, try disabling Reflex and see if that performance comes back. Typically that bug fixes itself after a restart, but you may want to just keep it disabled if you've experienced that bug until BSG says that they've patched it out again. High quality color is something that I'd avoid. In the last settings guide I made, I'm pretty sure I said that it didn't have much of a performance impact, but recently it has seen a little bit of a performance dip when you have it enabled, so I would just not use high quality color for now. If you wanted to know what it did, I closed iCat, god damn it. If you want to know what high quality color did, basically it controls the gradients in between the colors as it gets darker and darker from a light source. It's virtually impossible to see right here with off on the left and on the right. The performance impact that it had made me think that it's not really worth it. If something changes during the wipe though, which maybe it will, or maybe we'll actually get a concrete explanation of high quality color from BSG, but what am I saying? I'm keeping my hopes too high. But if we hear anything about it, I'll make sure to post an updated comment down below in the pinned comment to explain what it does after. So just keep an eye on that pinned comment if you're watching several months down the line. I would uncheck Z-blur, chromatic aberrations, and noise, as they can just make the game a bit more blurry, and especially noise will make it just way harder to see things, so I would not recommend noise. I would not recommend chromatic aberrations, as that is the banding of color that you used to see with painkillers sometimes. I would not have that checked. I don't think anybody wants that. And Z-blur basically blurs the gun as it gets closer to your PMC, so if you like that look, then you can keep it on, but otherwise I wouldn't have it enabled. And grass shadows obviously control shadows on grass. I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. There has been some bugs in the past where grass shadowing was sort of going all over the place, regardless of if you had the setting on or not. It like would flicker to a dark black color and then back on again over and over, which made it really distracting. I haven't seen that this wipe yet, so if you're not GPU bound and you like how grass shadows look, feel free to have them on. But I tend to just have them off, as I believe that the clarity that it gives might be improved, especially if it's in a greener area. Right now, with the white snow, maybe it's not the case, but again, it's your personal call. Just know that if you want to run grass shadows, there is a slight impact to your performance when GPU bottlenecked. So again, keep that in mind. It does not affect your performance when CPU bound from what I've seen so far. With that, these are the PostFX settings. Everything seems to be the exact same as it was last wipe. You can see right here, let me just get a quick live demonstration. We're at 180 FPS, and typically the only settings that affected this were clarity and adaptive sharpen when GPU bottlenecked. So you can see we're at 180 right now. If I go and enable clarity, I should see reduction performance. I can actually just test this live. So you can see we're at 172 when I set clarity to 0. We're at 180. So when GPU bottleneck, clarity still affects your performance, and adaptive sharpen still does the exact same amount as well. So if you're trying to use PostFX, I would avoid those two options unless you are not GPU bottlenecked most of the time. Enabling PostFX as a whole did tend to have a slight performance increase as well, or performance decrease when you enabled it. You can see there that I got a couple FPS, but I take that very, very slight reduction in order to have a nice brighter image here. There are some ways to do that externally, but I feel like it's more convenient for me, who plays a lot of different games, to just do it through here and take that very, very, very slight performance hit. As long as you avoid clarity and adaptive sharpen, you should be just fine. If you'd like a deeper dive into all these settings though, I do have a PostFX guide that I will also link down below. Just trying to make sure this video doesn't get to like 40 minutes long. And finally, there's no more binaural audio. We're on Meta Audio now, which is the successor, or not successor, but it just renamed Oculus Audio. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see how long that lasts. Surely they won't replace it again. With that is everything. That is all the settings covered to the best of my ability right now. I didn't want to wait too long to get this video out because I know a lot of people are looking at ways to improve their performance and what settings they should run for this wipe. So I wanted to try to give you guys an update as soon as possible. I have some tests that I still need to do with texture quality, with the object LOD quality. I want to see what happens with that in the future. So especially with VRAM and RAM utilization. So we'll see how that goes in the future. It's going to take me a lot of time to actually benchmark all that because I can't test for example, memory accumulation over the course of many different raids several different times in the course of only a couple days. So that's just how it's going to be. Make sure to subscribe to see whenever that guide comes out. Again, it's going to take me a while because that testing, each run for how I test for memory accumulation takes over an hour. So it's going to take me a while to actually do all that. If you guys have anything specifically you'd like to see me cover in future videos, make sure to leave it in the comments below. And again, do tune in to the streams at Friday at 6:30 p.m. and Sunday at 1:30 p.m. if you'd like any help from me directly. Do not hesitate to ask me any questions. I love answering the questions on stream, so make sure you do that. And you can always join the Discord as well and ask the almost 2,000 people in there any questions or concerns you have. They are more than willing to help you out there too. Thank you so much for the support. We officially hit 10,000 subscribers, I think. I'm pretty sure I checked it a little bit ago and we hit that. So yeah, that's kind of mind-boggling for me. I really appreciate it, and thank you all for being here. I will continue to try my best to test some more things and get you guys some more updated info as soon as possible. Make sure to check out the links in the description below, and I'll see you in the live streams and in my Discord. For now, this is Clem, and I'm clocking out. Later.